Why did no one look at her when she entered the room? She stood against the back wall of the command briefing hall, arms folded loosely, boots planted in silence. Lieutenant Mara Hale. No medals on display, no loud voice, just another name on the roster. At least that's how they treated her. The briefing buzzed with confident male voices, overlapping strategies, polished egos. She'd flown the route they were arguing about. She'd seen the terrain with her own eyes, but when she spoke once quietly, no one responded. The words vanished into the room like smoke. Mara swallowed the familiar ache. Being ignored wasn't new. She'd learned to survive inside it. The Admiral entered late, seal pin gleaming, authority filling the space before he spoke. Laughter followed him like an escort. He scanned the room, eyes sharp, amused. Then they landed on her. "Well," he said, smirking, "and what's your rank, pilot?" The tone was light, a joke. The room leaned in, already smiling. Mara didn't answer immediately. Her pulse slowed instead. She felt the old discipline settle into her bones, the one forged long before she ever wore this uniform. "Major General," she said calmly. The silence was violent. Laughter died mid-breath. Chairs stilled. Someone coughed. The Admiral's smile froze, then cracked. His eyes searched her face again, this time without humor. Recognition flickered, not of her, but of something he didn't expect to meet here. Fear. Mara didn't elaborate. She never did. She simply met his gaze, steady and unflinching, and let the truth do what truth always does when it's finally allowed into the room. Collapse illusions. They didn't know yet why that title mattered, or why she'd spent years making herself small enough to survive in their blind spots. They would, just not all at once. Some reckonings take time. What kind of soldier chooses invisibility over power? Years earlier, before the silence, before the jokes, before the mop closets and windowless offices, Mara Hale had commanded operations that never made the news. Precision missions, surgical extractions, the kind that saved lives without parades. She didn't crave recognition. She believed in outcomes, in people getting home alive. Then came the operation that changed everything. A hostage rescue that went wrong on paper but right in reality. Every civilian lived, every hostile neutralized, minimal casualties. The plan had been hers, the risk had been hers, the calls had been hers, but when the reports were written, her name disappeared. Another officer's rose in its place. Higher rank, better politics. She noticed, of course she did. What she didn't expect was the cost of noticing. Her husband died 3 weeks later. A training accident, clean file, closed case, but Mara knew the shape of lies. She'd navigated them her entire career, and this one reeked of warning. Disappear or lose more. So she stepped away, not dramatically, not publicly, just quietly, a resignation misplaced, records redacted, a woman erased. She became maintenance staff, logistics, anything that let her stay close enough to watch without being seen. She raised her daughter in that silence. And for years it worked. Until the day an admiral mistook her restraint for weakness. Why did the map change after she walked past it? Captain Reyes hadn't noticed her at first. He was too busy arguing with his analysts. Airspace violations, diplomatic fallout, limited options, voices climbed, tension thickened. Mara pushed her cleaning cart along the edge of the room, eyes scanning the map without seeming to. Her hand adjusted the cart slightly, just enough for the handle to align with a narrow western pass marked in gray. Reyes paused mid-sentence. "What about the west?" he asked slowly. The room shifted, new calculations, new energy. Mara kept moving. Only one person noticed. Lieutenant Samira Noor, sharp eyes, quiet mind. She watched Mara leave, something unsettled blooming in her chest. Later, Samira found her polishing a display case. "You used to command," she said, not accusing, curious. Mara didn't stop working. "I clean glass." "That wasn't cleaning, that was guidance." Silence stretched between them, not hostile, just heavy. Some skills don't fade, Mara finally said. They just learn to stay quiet. Samira didn't press, but the question followed her like a shadow. What does a daughter feel when the truth starts bleeding through the cracks? Alina Hale was 16 when she found the photograph. Dress uniform, 2 stars, her mother standing straighter than anyone else in the frame, strong, unafraid, alive in a way Alina had never seen at home. Mara took the photo gently, didn't scold, didn't explain. Some doors, she said softly, stay closed to keep the people behind them safe. Alina nodded, but something inside her shifted. Later, when the Admiral arrived unannounced, when security tightened and tension rose, Alina received the message. Your mother owes us. Come with us if you want answers. Fear didn't paralyze her, it clarified her. She walked into the facility, escorted by strangers who smiled too easily. And when she saw her mother standing in that room, no longer small, no longer invisible, something settled inside her chest. Understanding. What happens when stolen credit finally demands payment? The Admiral tried to control the room. He tried to laugh it off, tried to frame it as deception. Major General, he scoffed, you resigned. Mara didn't raise her voice. I was buried. The Inspector General arrived before the Admiral could finish the sentence he'd been rehearsing for years. Files unsealed, communications recovered, money trails illuminated. And then the truth no one wanted surfaced. Her husband hadn't died in an accident. He'd been silenced. The room changed when Alina said it out loud. When the words crossed a boundary no rank could erase. Mara didn't cry. Not then. She stood between her daughter and the man who'd built a career on betrayal. You mistook my silence for surrender, she said quietly. It was strategy. The Admiral's fear wasn't theatrical anymore. It was human, and too late. What does strength look like when the dust finally settles? Mara didn't reclaim her rank. She didn't ask for medals returned or headlines rewritten. She testified, she protected her daughter, she told the truth once fully and let it stand. Some officers apologized, some didn't, power rarely does. But when Alina watched her mother walk out of that facility, head high, shoulders free, she understood something few people ever do. Greatness doesn't need to announce itself. It survives, it endures, it waits. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't shout. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts. Why did she walk away from power when the war had finally started listening to her? The night Mara Hale resigned, there was no ceremony, no folded flag, no speeches about service or sacrifice. She packed her locker alone, the metal door clicking shut with a sound that felt smaller than the life she was leaving behind. Outside, the base was quiet in that artificial way military installations get after midnight, too ordered to be peaceful, too controlled to feel safe. She sat in her car for a long time before turning the key. Not because she was unsure, because she knew exactly what she was doing. Operation Helios had been a success on every metric that mattered. 43 hostages alive, 2 aircraft recovered, 0 civilian casualties. The plan, her plan, had threaded a needle through airspace no one else was willing to touch. She'd flown the final insertion herself, hands steady, heart calm, trusting instincts sharpened by years of repetition and loss. The after-action report told a different story. Her name appeared once, buried, a footnote beneath a man who'd never left headquarters. Mara read the report 3 times, not in anger, in disbelief. She could have fought it, filed appeals, dragged it into daylight. She knew the system well enough to know how ugly that fight would become. She also knew something else, something the men climbing ranks above her never seemed to learn. Power doesn't forgive exposure. 3 days later, her husband didn't come home. They said it was a vehicle malfunction, rural road, Rain, tragic timing, the investigation was brief, efficient, closed. Mara stood at the funeral holding her daughter's hand, listening to words that felt rehearsed and felt something inside her lock into place. Not grief, grief came later. This was calculation, survival. That night she burned copies of mission notes she'd never submitted, encrypted the rest, stored them where only she could reach. Then she did something no one expected. She disappeared. Not vanished, not defected. She stepped sideways, resigned under compassionate leave, let her service record be misfiled, watched as doors quietly closed behind her without resistance. No one chased her, no one questioned it. That hurt more than she expected. Years later, standing in the same building she once helped design tactical doctrine for, now dressed in neutral gray, badge clipped low, posture deliberately softened, Mara wondered if invisibility was a skill you learned or something the world forced on you. She scrubbed floors that reflected medals she used to earn, emptied trash cans beneath portraits of men who quoted her work without knowing her face. It wasn't punishment, it was camouflage. And camouflage, when done right, keeps you alive. Still, there were moments, small ones, the kind that slipped past defenses. Like when a young lieutenant snapped at her for being in the way, and she felt the reflex to correct his stance, his breath control, his situational blindness. Or when she overheard pilots arguing whether patterns she'd memorized by feel. She never corrected them. Correction invites attention. At home, Elena grew into questions. "Mama, why don't you talk about work?" Mara always smiled, always deflected, because work isn't who we are. It was half-true, the most dangerous kind. Elena inherited her father's curiosity and her mother's discipline. She noticed patterns, notebooks, the way Mara listened to the news, the way her body changed when military terms came up, stillness replacing ease. Secrets live longer when love is quiet. But secrets also leave residue. The morning Admiral Cross visited the facility, Mara sensed it before the announcement. The air changed. Voices tightened. Floors were cleaned twice instead of once. People started looking past her instead of through her, which was worse. Visibility meant scrutiny. She adjusted her routine, stayed near exits, watched reflections instead of faces, old habits returning like muscle memory waking from sleep. When the Admiral finally spoke to her, when he made the joke, something unexpected happened. He wasn't the first to underestimate her. He was just the loudest. Calling her rank hadn't been defiance. It had been inevitability, a line she'd known would be crossed eventually. The truth has a gravity. It pulls toward exposure no matter how long you keep it in orbit. Now in the aftermath, the building buzzed differently. Whispers followed her cart. Officers avoided eye contact. Some looked embarrassed, others curious, a few angry. Lieutenant Samira, Nor approached her again near the archive wing. "They're reopening old files," Samira said quietly. "Helios, your unit." Mara kept wiping the glass. History reopens itself when it wants attention. "You could stop this," Samira pressed. "You could step forward." Mara finally looked at her, really looked. "Why would I?" Samira hesitated. "Because it's wrong." Mara nodded once. "So is leaving your child unprotected." The words landed heavier than intended. Samira softened. "You're afraid." "Yes," Mara said simply, "and that's not weakness." That night Mara stood on her apartment balcony listening to traffic, calculating distances, angles, the same way she always had when something shifted. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, one line. She should never have looked too closely. Mara deleted it immediately, hands steady, heart not. Inside, Elena slept with a textbook open on her chest, a pen still in her fingers. Mara watched her breathe, felt the familiar ache of devotion tighten her ribs. 15 years ago, She'd chosen silence over justice. Now silence was cracking. And cracks, if ignored long enough, become entry points. Mara didn't know yet who was moving against her, only that someone had noticed she was still alive, still watching, still capable. She closed the balcony door and leaned against it, finally allowing the weight of the decision she'd postponed for a decade and a half to settle. You can hide from power. You can't hide from consequence. And soon, very soon, she would have to decide whether the safest place for the truth was still buried, or standing in front of her daughter, unafraid. The war hadn't ended when she resigned. It had just learned to wait. Why did the surveillance camera blink red just as she passed beneath it? Mara felt it before she saw it, that prickle between the shoulder blades, the sensation she'd learned to trust more than instruments, more than orders. Someone was watching, not casually, not passively, actively. She didn't look up. Looking up confirms awareness. She kept her pace even, cart rolling smoothly, the faint squeak of one wheel echoing down the corridor. Around her, the operations wing hummed with low voices and digital murmurs. Screens glowed behind glass walls. Maps shifted. Icons moved. Decisions were being made that would ripple far beyond this building. And she was officially no one. The red blink stopped. That was worse. Mara turned the corner into the archive corridor and exhaled slowly. The air here was cooler, quieter, fewer people, fewer witnesses. She parked the cart and pretended to adjust the trash liner while her eyes scanned reflections in the polished floor. Two figures at the far end, not in uniform, too still, too observant. Civilian contractors, maybe, or something that wore the shape of them. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. This time no message preview, just a call. She didn't answer. Not yet. She pushed the cart forward again, passing a secure door marked with clearance codes she'd helped design years ago. Muscle memory tugged at her fingers. She ignored it. The call ended. A second later, a text appeared. "We know who you are, General." No threats, no demands. Just acknowledgement. That night Mara dreamed of flying again. Not combat, just altitude, clean sky. The kind of silence that only exists above weather and noise. She woke before impact, heart racing, the phantom feel of controls still in her hands. Alina was already up, sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her tablet. "They're talking about you online," Alina said carefully. Mara froze. Who? Alina turned the screen. A military forum, anonymous posts, old photos, redacted files resurfacing like bones after a flood. If this is real, someone owes her everything. Why did she vanish? Who benefits from her staying quiet? Mara closed the tablet gently. "Listen to me," she said. "If anyone contacts you, anyone, you tell me immediately." Alina studied her, not frightened, focused. "Is this about Dad?" The question landed with surgical precision. "Yes," Mara said. The truth tasted sharp. "Partly." Alina nodded once. "Then we don't run." Mara felt a surge of pride, so strong it scared her. At the base, the mood had shifted again. Security tightened. Doors locked that used to stay open. The Admiral was gone, recalled for review, though everyone knew what that meant. Power didn't like being embarrassed. Lieutenant Samira, Nor found Mara near the loading bay. "They've assigned a protection detail to you," Samira said under her breath. "Unofficial, they say it's for your safety." "Protection from whom?" Mara asked. Samira hesitated. "That's the problem." Later that afternoon, Mara was summoned, not officially but firmly, to a conference room she hadn't entered in 15 years. The same long table, the same flags, different faces, younger, hungrier. An intelligence director spoke first, calm, polished. "You've become a liability," he said. Mara leaned back in her chair. "Liabilities are managed, threats are eliminated. Which am I?" A pause. Respect crept in uninvited. There are people who don't want the Helios files reopened, he said. People who believe your silence was contractual. I never signed anything, Mara replied. No, he agreed, you didn't. That night as she drove home, a black SUV followed her for 3 turns. Not subtle, a test. She took a 4th turn she shouldn't have, slowed, then accelerated suddenly. The SUV hesitated. Amateurs. She pulled into a crowded grocery lot and disappeared into the chaos. When she returned to her car 20 minutes later, the SUV was gone. At home, she packed a go-bag. Not panic, preparation, documents, cash, a small encrypted drive, and at the bottom a folded photograph of her husband, smiling without armor. She sat on the edge of the bed afterward, the weight finally pressing down. She had tried to protect Alina by staying small. Now staying small was putting a target on her back. The call came at 2:14 a.m. This is Colonel Ashford, the voice said, older, tired, honest in a way that surprised her. I served under you once. Mara closed her eyes. Then you know why I'm listening. They're planning to bury this again, Ashford said. And if that fails, they'll bury you. Silence stretched. There's a hearing, he continued. Off the record in 48 hours. If you speak there, it all comes out. And if I do? Ashford exhaled. Then history stays wrong. Mara ended the call and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant fires. She thought of the men who'd taken credit, of the ones who'd looked away, of the system that rewarded silence until silence became a weapon. Most of all, she thought of Alina. Sometimes survival isn't about staying alive. Sometimes it's about deciding what kind of world survives you. And as dawn began to bleed into the sky, Mara Hale made a choice she'd been postponing for 15 years. She would stop hiding. Not for revenge. Not for recognition. But because the truth, once seen, deserves at least one person brave enough to stand in front of it. Why did her hands start shaking only after she agreed to testify? Mara noticed it while tying her boots. The tremor was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was there, an uninvited visitor slipping past years of discipline. She paused, fingers resting on the laces, and breathed until the shaking eased. Not gone, just managed. Fear didn't mean she was unprepared. It meant the stakes were real. The hearing wasn't listed anywhere official. No schedule, no press. Just a secure location passed through a chain of voices that trusted her enough, or feared the truth enough, to keep it quiet. Colonel Ashford insisted on driving. He didn't say why, but his eyes kept scanning intersections like he expected the road itself to turn hostile. They spoke little. Silence had its own gravity. As the building came into view, unmarked, concrete, forgettable, Mara felt the weight of time settle on her shoulders. 15 years compressed into a single morning. Every decision she'd made to protect her daughter. Every time she'd swallowed words that wanted daylight. She wasn't walking in as a general. She was walking in as a witness. Inside, the room was smaller than she expected. No flags, no ceremony, just a long table, 5 officials, and a recording device already running. Faces she recognized from old briefings, others she didn't. Power shifts. It always does. State your name for the record, someone said. Mara Elizabeth Hale, she replied. Her voice was steady now. Former Major General, United States Air Force. The title hung there, no laughter this time. They asked about Helios first. Dates, decisions, command structure. She answered with precision, careful not to dramatize. Facts didn't need embellishment. They carried enough weight on their own. Then came the harder questions. Why did you resign? Mara paused. She felt the room lean forward, not physically but attentively. Because my husband died, she said. 3 days after I objected to falsified attribution in an after-action report. Silence. And because I was warned, she continued, that pressing the issue would put my family at risk. Who warned you? She named him, no hesitation. The air changed. By the time they adjourned, her throat burned and her spine ached, but something inside her felt lighter, not relieved, just aligned, like she'd finally stopped carrying weight that didn't belong to her. Outside, Ashford placed a hand on her shoulder. You did more than you know. I did what I should have done then, Mara replied. That's all. The drive home felt longer, traffic heavier. Or maybe she was just more aware now. Exposure does that, it sharpens edges. Her phone buzzed once, then again. Blocked numbers, voicemails left without words, a presence announcing itself through absence. When she reached her apartment, Elena was waiting by the door, backpack slung over one shoulder. You didn't answer your phone, Elena said, trying to sound casual. I was in a dead zone, Mara replied, another half-truth. Elena studied her mother's face. Did it go bad? Mara shook her head. No, it went honest. They sat at the kitchen table together, the same one where homework and meals and quiet talks had unfolded for years. Ordinary furniture holding extraordinary weight. Elena, Mara said gently, things might get uncomfortable for a while. Elena smiled faintly. They already were. That night, the power went out just after midnight. Mara was awake when it happened. She moved before the darkness fully settled, crossing the apartment in silence, checking locks, angles, shadows. Years peeled back like they'd never been gone. A knock came, soft, controlled. Mara Hale, a voice called. We'd like to talk. She didn't answer. The knock came again, firmer this time. Mama, Elena whispered from her room. Stay there, Mara said quietly. She opened the door just enough to see two men, suits, government-issued confidence, the kind that assumes compliance. You're making this harder than it needs to be, one said. Mara met his eyes. You came to the wrong place to simplify things. They didn't force their way in. That surprised her. Instead, they delivered the message they'd come with. This path you're on, the other said, doesn't end with vindication. It ends with isolation. Mara almost smiled. I've been isolated for 15 years. They left without another word. The power returned 10 minutes later. The next day the story broke, not publicly but internally. Investigations expanding, names suspended, careers stalling mid-climb, the system resisting but cracking. Mara was placed on administrative leave for her protection. She laughed at that. Protection had never been something offered to her before. Elena came home from school quieter than usual. They asked about you, she said finally. My counselor said I could talk to someone if I was stressed. Mara's chest tightened. And were you? Elena shrugged. I told them I was proud. That night Mara sat alone on the balcony again. Same city, same lights, but everything felt closer now, louder. She thought of her husband, of the moment she'd chosen silence, of the years spent believing that survival required shrinking. She understood now what that choice had cost her daughter. Not safety. Time. The phone rang once more, a new number. This is the beginning, Colonel Ashford said. They're pushing back hard. Let them, Mara replied. I'm done yielding. When the call ended, she stayed there, listening to the city breathe. Strength, she realized, wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to act anyway, knowing exactly what it might cost. And for the first time since she'd stepped out of uniform, Mara Hale felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Not victory, but peace. Whatever came next, she would meet it standing. Why did the room fall silent when she walked back into the building she was never meant to return to? The badge they issued her that morning was temporary, white, no insignia, the kind that said observe, don't belong. Mara clipped it to her jacket without comment and stepped through security as the scanners hummed around her. Faces turned. Conversations stalled, not because she was powerful again, but because she was inconvenient. Truth always is. The investigation had grown teeth overnight. Offices sealed, drives confiscated, senior names quietly removed from distribution lists. People who once spoke over her now spoke carefully around her, as if words themselves might betray loyalties they hadn't examined until now. Mara didn't enjoy it. That surprised some people. Enjoyment was never the point. She was escorted to a small briefing room by an analyst barely old enough to remember Helios when it happened. He avoided her eyes, hands tight around a tablet. "They may call you again today," he said, "if you're willing." Mara nodded, "if they're ready." He swallowed and left her alone. The room smelled faintly of coffee and ozone. Old electronics, old habits. She sat, hands folded, and waited. Waiting had become a discipline. Across the city, Alina sat in a classroom pretending to take notes while her phone buzzed with messages she didn't answer. Rumors traveled faster than facts. Someone's parent worked somewhere. Someone had heard something. The outline of her mother's past was taking shape in whispers, and she felt an odd mix of pride and fear twisting together in her chest. At lunch, a friend leaned in. "Is it true your mom ran things?" Alina hesitated, then nodded. "She still does, just differently." Back in the briefing room, the door opened. This time it wasn't a panel, it was one man. Director Vance. He didn't sit, neither did she. "You're forcing our hand," he said without preamble. Mara met his gaze. "I didn't start this." "No," he agreed, "but you're finishing it." He paced once, controlled. "Do you know how many operations rely on the stability of the people you're implicating?" "Yes," Mara said. "I designed half of them." That stopped him. "You think removing them won't create chaos?" he pressed. "I think keeping them already has." Silence again. He exhaled slowly. "There's a counter-narrative forming," he said. "They're framing this as a personal grievance, a grieving widow misremembering events." Mara's jaw tightened, not in anger but resolve, then released the full Helios telemetry, unedited. Vance winced. "That would expose." "Everything," she finished, "including the truth." He studied her for a long moment. "You've changed." "No," Mara said quietly. "I stopped pretending." That afternoon, the first arrest happened. Quiet. No cameras. A former deputy logistics chief escorted out through a side door. The ripple was immediate. Phones buzzed. Meetings canceled. Lines drawn in invisible ink suddenly visible. Mara was called again, this time to a larger room. Someone asked, "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" The question carried judgment, wrapped in curiosity. Mara didn't rush the answer. "Because every time I thought about it," she said, "I pictured my daughter standing where I am now, and I wanted her safe more than I wanted to be right." A pause. "And now," someone asked. "Now she's old enough to understand why silence isn't safety." That evening, Alina didn't come home on time. The call came at 7:18 p.m. "Mama," Alina said, breathless, "I'm okay, but I think someone followed me." Mara felt the world narrow. "Where are you?" "Library downtown. I went in circles like you taught me. They're outside." Mara was already moving. She didn't call it in. Not yet. She drove with the kind of calm that only arrives when fear has nowhere left to go. Every red light felt like an insult, every mile a test. When she arrived, she saw them immediately. Two men across the street, too alert, too focused. She parked, stepped out, and walked straight toward them. They didn't expect that. "Back away from my daughter," she said, voice low. "No threat, just fact." One man scoffed, the other hesitated. "You're escalating," the first said. "No," Mara replied, "you already did." Sirens wailed in the distance. Not for this. But they were close enough to change calculations. The men backed off, melting into traffic. Elena burst out of the library moments later, eyes wide, arms tight around her mother. "I wasn't scared," she said quickly. "I know," Mara murmured into her hair. "You did everything right." That night Mara didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, documents spread out, cross-referencing timelines she'd avoided for years. Names, decisions, consequences, the full shape of the machine that had crushed dissent and called it order. Near dawn, Elena joined her, wrapped in a blanket. "Are we in danger?" Elena asked. Mara considered lying. "Yes," she said instead, "but we always were, we just didn't know it." Elena nodded. "Then don't stop." The next day, the Helios telemetry was released internally. Unedited. Flight paths, audio logs, command overrides, every choice traced back to its source. The story rewrote itself in real time. There was no room left for reinterpretation. By evening, resignations followed arrests. Not justice yet, but momentum. Mara was asked if she wanted her rank restored. She declined. "I don't need symbols," she said. "I need accountability." As she left the building that night, badge returned, jacket light on her shoulders, she felt the strange quiet that follows a storm. Not relief, not triumph. Just space. She knew this wasn't over. Power never concedes without leaving scars, but something irreversible had happened. The truth was no longer hers alone. And when Elena slipped her hand into her mother, as they walked home together, Mara understood the cost of everything she'd done, and everything she'd waited too long to do. Redemption, she realized, isn't about being forgiven. It's about refusing to let the lie live longer than the truth. And whatever came next, she would face it not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as herself. Why did she feel lighter the moment she stopped waiting for an ending? The last hearing ended without applause, without ceremony, without even a final statement meant for the cameras. There were no cameras, just a tired room and a truth that had finally been spoken too many times to be ignored again. Mara Hale signed the final document, slid the pen back across the table and stood. No one stopped her. No one needed to. Outside, the air felt different, not freer, just honest. The investigations would continue for months, maybe years. Committees loved timelines. Justice moved at a pace that never matched grief, but the machinery had shifted and everyone in that building knew it. Some walked lighter, others avoided mirrors. Myra walked away. She wasn't escorted this time. At home, Elena waited on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, eyes tracking the door until it opened. "Is it done?" she asked. Mara thought about the question carefully. "It's finished starting," she said. Elena smiled at that, the kind of smile that understands complexity without needing it simplified. They ate dinner quietly, not because there was nothing to say, but because the noise of the past weeks had finally faded enough to hear themselves think. The clink of utensils felt grounding, real. Later, as the city settled into night, Mara stood by the window one last time. Same view, same lights, but the weight that used to press against her spine was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar. Space. She thought of her husband, not the way he died, but the way he laughed when Elena was small. The way he trusted her judgment even when others didn't. She realized she'd been carrying not just grief, but guilt. Guilt for surviving, for staying silent, for believing love required disappearance. She let it go. The phone buzzed softly, a message from Lieutenant Samira Noor. "I wanted you to know your work is being taught again, with your name on it." Mara closed her eyes, not in pride, in relief. She typed back a single line. "Teach them why it mattered." Days passed, then weeks. Mara declined interviews. She declined consulting offers. She declined the invitation to reclaim a life defined by rooms she no longer needed. Instead, she did something smaller and braver. She applied to teach. Not tactics, not command theory. Ethics, decision-making under uncertainty, the human cost of obedience. The classroom was modest, the students young, some skeptical, some eager. She didn't wear medals. She didn't tell war stories unless they asked, and even then she spoke more about doubt than about victories. One afternoon, a student raised a hand. "Ma'am," he asked, "how do you know when to disobey?" Mara considered him carefully. "When the order asks you to become someone you can't live with afterward." The room went quiet. At home, Alina started college applications. She wrote her essay about integrity, not as a slogan but as a series of hard choices made without guarantees. She didn't name her mother. She didn't need to. On the anniversary of Helios, Mara visited a small airfield outside the city. No base, no guard towers, just a private strip and an old trainer aircraft rented by the hour. The instructor recognized her hands the moment she touched the controls. "You ever flown before?" he asked. She smiled faintly, a little. The plane lifted gently, the ground falling away with familiar grace. As the city shrank beneath her, Mara felt the quiet return, the real one. Not the silence of hiding, but the stillness of belonging to the moment. Up there were no ranks, no lies, no stolen credit. Just air and responsibility. When she landed, the instructor stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. "You could have gone anywhere," he said. "I did," Mara replied. "I came back." That evening, Alina met her at the door. "You look different," Alina said. "I feel different," Mara answered. They sat together on the balcony, watching the lights blink on one by one. No threats now, no watchers in the shadows, just a city doing what cities do, enduring. Alina leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "Do you regret it?" she asked, "staying quiet all those years?" Mara thought of the fear, the protection, the cost. "Yes," she said honestly, "and no." Alina nodded. "I think that's what courage looks like, not being sure." Mara smiled. She understood then that redemption doesn't arrive like a medal or a verdict. It arrives quietly, in the choice to live openly after years of folding inward. The world hadn't changed because she spoke. It changed because she finally stopped disappearing. And as the night deepened, Mara Hale sat with her daughter and allowed herself something she had denied for far too long. Not absolution, not praise, but peace. Because sometimes dignity doesn't argue. It doesn't demand. It doesn't even explain. Sometimes dignity simply acts and lets the truth catch up in its own time.